The crash out about Restore Britain is still going somehow, so I thought we would review this latest round of hit pieces, starting from everyone's least favourite ageing twink, Owen Jones. There are no guardrails now on the right of UK politics. Where Restore Britain goes, others will follow. Rupert Lowe actually posted an extract from this article saying, "Thank you for the endorsement, Owen." Yeah, brilliant. I agree. Restore Britain is setting the parameters of acceptable politics on the right, because it's making Reform realise that the votes lie to their right, and that there is a significant portion of voters that do not feel represented, because the existing political paradigm doesn't speak to their intuitions. The bringing back of the death penalty to rebalance the moral ledger that occurs when foreign criminals can just commit the most heinous crimes day after day and not receive a punishment proportionate to the lives that they've ruined or taken. The fact that our country seems to have its doors flung wide open to Pashtun sex tourists, or Indian scammers, or infinite numbers of Nigerian nurses on fake qualifications, and we've just been a steady procession of millions of foreigners flooding our country for the last few decades. Actually, we can just shut our doors and, not only that, tell the ones already here to go home. It's not a politics that's beyond the pale. It's a politics that millions of people feel are necessary, morally just. And as of yet, there have been no other parties willing to speak to those concerns than Restore Britain. And now many parties are racing to keep pace with the precedents that Restore Britain is setting. And when your enemies are noticing and tearing their hair out about it, and more importantly, when Rupert Lowe refuses to back down or apologise, you know you're onto a winning formula here, whether or not Restore are going to peak at the top of the polls before the next election, though that is certainly their intention. Anyway, Owen writes, what qualifies as too right-wing these days? It's a question I've considered often in recent years. Owen, you think that unlimited license for sexual degeneracy and limitless numbers of foreign nationals coming into our country to then self-declare as being as British as us, with no qualifiers, by the way, on who should be eligible to come into the country, no tests of friendship, no tests of character. You think that men can recite magic words, put on a dress and call themselves women. So actually, you're probably not the best person to act as a barometer of what is and isn't acceptable right-wing politics. I happen to think that you want to gatekeep against our interests, and so spare me the concerned trolling. Anyway, it takes on even greater urgency when contemplating the rise of Restore Britain. Founded by multi-millionaire businessman and former Reform MP Rupert Lowe, the party enjoys the active support of far-right tech bro Elon Musk, the world's richest man. If Nigel Farage strikes you as a wet liberal, then Restore Britain may be the party you've been waiting for. Again, there are just a never-ending stream of quotes that Restore should be putting on their website under an endorsement tab, and that's the latest one. Restore's mission, it says, is to reverse mass migration. That means deporting not just undocumented, illegal, immigrants, but legally resident foreign nationals who live in social housing, claim benefits, or supposedly fail to integrate. A strikingly elastic category. Yes, it's almost like you've picked up on that. Lowe himself declares that millions and millions need to leave or be made to leave. Officials and politicians who knowingly placed dangerous third world savages in our communities will be imprisoned. It's a pretty bad day to be Robert Jenrick, Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak. The list goes on and on and on. Yes, Rupert Lowe has committed to retroactively prosecuting politicians and civil servants and agents of the state who inflicted mass migration on us. Again, if you're a single-issue voter, I don't think anyone else is promising that, largely because every other party is implicated in that agenda by having the architects of those mass migratory waves in their party, and refuse to extricate them, thereby saving themselves that headache. You should hardly be surprised that among Restore's prominent supporters are those with links to neo-Nazis who support the total remigration of any Britons with non-white heritage. Given this is coming from someone who would like to turn Britain into a third world slum with Sodom and Gomorrah characteristics, I actually don't care what you do and don't find acceptable, Owen. Again, the concern trolling is not coming from within a frame of reference where we would like to see the same vision of Britain at the end of it, and so I don't actually care what you get offended about. It may feel comforting to dismiss them as fringe wackos who have always existed. Surely they're only louder because social media gives them a voice. Musk is certainly doing his best to boost his pet British cause on X, but Musk doesn't own Facebook. And on Facebook, which is Rupert Lowe's largest platform, he is eating Nigel Farage's lunch, and you don't really have an answer for that, because unless Mark Zuckerberg is riding around on a Restore Britain wakeboard, which would be pretty lindy, by the way, I don't think just dismissing this as a quirk of Elon's algorithm is a convincing argument. Well, there's a robin. Hello, that's beautiful. He's got breadcrumb. That's lovely. I love England. Sorry, I've got a window right outside my recording studio. Whether Restore Britain's claimed 130,000 membership is real, which would mean the party is bigger than the Conservatives, Labour canvassers on the ground for the Makerfield by-election report that it is finding an audience. It's that telling quote that is why Reform's behaviour to Restore seems disproportionate if you take them at their word that Restore isn't a threat, it's 1%, it's just one angry man with a Twitter account, as Nigel Farage said. If they really were irrelevant, they wouldn't be talking about Restore so much. And it's because they're not irrelevant, it's because internal party polling from Restore, Labour, and I suspect Reform, though people in Reform tell me otherwise, as well as the findings of the Times and Telegraph podcasts and a piece coming forward in the iPaper, show Restore actually have a substantial amount of support in Makerfield, and they're in a strong third, if not competitive for second at the moment. Jones says, yes, the party may ultimately split the right-wing vote and help deliver victory to Andy Burnham. It would be deeply unwise for his camp to feel gratitude. Restore Britain is not an isolated phenomenon. It is the latest chapter in a much bigger story unfolding across Britain and the wider West. After the fascism of the Second World War reduced Europe to rubble and exterminated 17 million people, a political consensus emerged. A cordon sanitaire would be established to the right of democratic politics as a sort of ideological ring-fencing. Wild that he is just admitting, yes, the post-war consensus exists. Yes, an entire political consensus was built around depriving you of ever having a country because for some reason you'll magically transform into Hitler if you love your own people, history and heritage, rather than that of third world rounds. And that's a good thing. Like, thank you for admitting that this is an entire containment exercise, Owen, because all we have to do is just say, oh, well, I don't care about that. I have the courage of my convictions. I'm not that worried about turning magically into a Nazi for asking for reasonable things, and I actually don't really care about the names you call me because you're a weird degenerate communist. And so we can just step out of that frame entirely, and that consensus just falls apart. So thank you for providing us the ability to reject that cordon sanitaire, because once we know what it is, we can just say, no thanks, we're going to do things in our interest instead. The far right were deemed politically illegitimate, an existential threat to democracy. No deals or pacts could be made with them, of the sort that Italian and German establishment parties struck in the 1920s and 30s, with ruinous consequences. The far right must be eternal pariahs. But the first serious breach came in Austria at the turn of the millennium, when the far-right Freedom Party, they're just libertarians, entered a coalition government. Then, there were mass protests and EU sanctions. Since then, far-right parties have been normalised across Europe with no such response. When Germany's centre-right Christian Democrats passed an anti-migration resolution last year with the support of the far-right AfD, they're led by a lesbian with a brown wife. I mean, they're hardly the second coming of Adolf Hitler. The Social Democratic leader told him, "You have broken this basic consensus of our republic." The Dutch far-right was the largest party in coalition government until it collapsed last year. In Spain, the mainstream conservatives struck regional coalitions with the far-right Vox. Okay. I understand that Owen Jones does not understand what most people want or think, because he is so blinded by ideology that he thinks that wanting a country is an unreasonable demand. But Owen, how does your theory explain all of these parties coming about at the same time if Restore Britain is just a product of disproportionate promotion by Elon Musk and X? How does it explain the rise of the Freedom Party in the early 2000s before social media existed? Is it because we have been swamped by people who have no right to be here? Is it because this post-war consensus is depriving indigenous European peoples of their countries, which is a reasonable demand? Is it because the ruling elite, as part of this consensus, are disconnected from the people that they are supposed to have a patrician concern over? Is it because they show nothing but contempt for our culture, history, heritage, and identity? Is it because our economies are immiserating us? And before you say, well, yes, that's because of the evil capitalists, yeah, who's bringing all those cheap foreign labourers into the country, Owen? It's funny how Navarro media can admit that while they might talk a good game on economics to economically illiterate young people, they can't compete with the right on the grounds of immigration, and actually, immigration is also deeply tied to economics, as well as all the sentimental, non-material concerns that people have that are neglected by the left, such as a feeling of belonging or possession of your own country, which you are deprived of if you don't recognise millions of people in your country, especially those who are treated preferentially under a two-tier pro-minority legal system. So, essentially, the left has no answers to the problems that its ideology has caused, and now the parties that you define as far right, with some of these parties being, quite frankly, weak and moderate, yeah, they're surging. Because the reasonable demands of people to be represented and prioritised in their own ancestral lands are becoming a political priority, and the consequences of ignoring the problems that have been created by depriving those people of that ancestral claim are much greater a risk than the names you will call them for solving those problems. This can all be boiled down to Rupert's slogan, "We don't care." And actually, allow me to modify that, we don't care if you're upset, except that it's very entertaining. Surviving centre-right parties have increasingly adopted the anti-migrant agendas of their more extreme rivals. Others have simply been taken over by the far right altogether, notably the US Republicans. Again, give me the second Trump administration that my enemies think that America has. The result is the same. The old consensus about what lies beyond the pale has collapsed. Yet because that consensus is horrible, it's brought millions of terrorists and rapists and colonists into our country, and the products of that consensus, they're rotten, so we just don't have to eat them. After all, the President of the United States can call Somalis garbage and say we don't want them in our country. True. That their country stinks. Yeah, why don't you live there, Owen? And that is now normal. Such language would have ended a political career. Today it barely registers. If the President of an admittedly declining superpower can pardon the far-right insurrectionists who have attempted a violent coup in 2021 and appoint senior figures who have a long history of spouting white supremacist views, talk of any cordon sanitaire sounds rather quaint. Bear in mind, 2020, the Black Lives Matter riots that you supported. People were killed, billions of dollars in property damage done, the entire Western world became subsumed in an anti-racist colour revolution, and you excused all of that as, what was it, the language of the unheard, that it was mostly peaceful. You set that precedent. Oh, and now again, I'm not justifying anyone going out and engaging in violence, not least of all because it gives the state an excuse to lock you up, and we need every patriot we can get when it comes time to taking our country back by purely democratic and peaceful means. Nevertheless, if you want to talk to me about pardoning people who took an unguided tour around the Capitol and who were fired on in a crowd by Capitol Police first, then I'm not really bothered when previous presidents, for example, have pardoned leftist terrorists, when you have excused all sorts of left-wing and Antifa violence, Owen. And he says that Britain is following the same trajectory. Farage now speaks of anti-white prejudice and anti-white discrimination, rhetoric long associated with the far-right fringe. Or it's just in the College of Policing's anti-racist policing guidance to treat races differently, meaning black people get better treatment despite committing more crimes, and white people are suspected of being the perennial perpetrators of racial oppression, which is blamed for the crimes, rather than just the black population being more delinquent and criminal, in literally every country that they're in. Reform advocates the deportation not only of undocumented migrants, but also lawful foreign residents, including those living in social housing. As Reform comes under pressure from Lowe's insurgency, it moves further right. And this is something that's picked up on in The Spectator later on, that even Reform politicians recognise the presence of Restore is forcing them rightward, or is just forcing them to adopt the policies that Reform's own voters and supporters have always wanted. And if you're worried about Restore splitting the right-wing vote, I would at least say that Restore is achieving the goals of itself as a movement by becoming a political party even better than they did when they weren't a political party and were just a cross-party movement. So it seems that Restore actually justifies its own existence, even if the goal is just to push Reform rightward in anticipation of them forming a government. What emerges is the conveyor belt of radicalisation, says Owen Jones, who has been a long-time friend of literally a communist Ash Sarkar, who has celebrated the decline in white British people in our country as "we are winning, lads." And that raises an unsettling question. If it is now mainstream to claim that white Britons are victims of systemic discrimination, what comes next? I don't know, other recognitions of reality? There are no roadblocks on the right-wing frontier. Beyond today's position lies an expanse of open territory, with politicians competing to occupy ever more extreme ground. Don't threaten me with a good time. The same permissiveness does not apply on the left. Are you fucking serious? Sorry, I didn't even read that sentence before I recorded this. You are a partner with Novara Media, members of whom celebrated the October the 7th massacre. Again, I'm not Jewish. I'm not really bothered about Israel. But people were raped and murdered. So, for all this rhetoric about the normalisation of violence, given that you are the company you keep, Owen, I don't really care about your outrage, because I can promise you nobody in Restore Britain would ever do something like that. But you think, for some reason, that is to be dismissed, downplayed, minimised, and some of the people around you think it should be justified. So, just worthy of note, progressive movements continue to be subjected to incessant scrutiny and moral panic. No, that's called a purity spiral from your own camp. Witness how opponents of Israel's genocide have been relentlessly smeared as extremists. Yeah, because that's never happened the other way around. The term anti-Semitism has never been used to shut down us wanting a country, has it? It will be in this video, by the way, because I've had a hit piece written about me by Melanie Phillips, who happened to watch my Harry and Carl's Lotus Eaters segment. Again, I'm just going to respond to the same thing. I don't care. I'm not going to abide by a double standard that deprives me of a country while Israel gets to be an ethno-state, I'm afraid. It's not going to happen. It has also hobbled the resistance to the far-right surge of mainstream parties raid the rhetoric and policies of the extremists while directing their own fire to the left. A coalition against the far-right cannot be built. Well, yeah, because the majority of voters in this country want policies you would describe as far-right, so your coalition is always going to be on losing ground. You're always going to be the rearguard action against public sentiment in a democracy, unless, of course, you ethnically gerrymander the democracy and fill it full of foreign client groups that only vote to expand the powers of the state, which acts as a patrician redistributing resources to their respective ethnic lobby or community group. He says, how exactly does this end? You increasingly fear that the poison will leave the system only when the system itself becomes sick enough to reject it. Turns out that the British have pretty strong livers. Perhaps support for these movements will recede once people experience the consequences of right-wing extremism in power, but once in office, these authoritarians will surely rig the game in their favour and make minorities and dissidents suffer. Oh really? You're worried about rigged system, are you, Owen? You're worried about a system that, for example, gatekeeps against certain political parties or political ideas, that favours one group over another. How interesting. It's not like you've been saying we should be doing that the entire article. And people actually do notice that. And so they realise that you are just an ideological partisan. You're not appealing to some sort of universal standard, which will result in our mutual benefit. And so we don't actually have to listen to what you say. And this is all of the attacks on not just Restore Britain, but Restore Britain as a proxy for the British people taking their own side and saying we're going to have a politics which prioritises us and our identity and our interests, our preferences and prejudices in our own country. And if that isn't your priority, then you are not my concern. The alternative is a politics capable of directing public anger towards concentrations of wealth and power rather than towards migrants. They bring the migrants in. And your resentment against rich and successful people is not as appealing as people who open their door and see the world around them change without ever having moved in the first place. Because your abstract, Marxist, ideological concern about the billionaires, who are not in my good books, by the way, because they've brought these people here in the first place, and have lobbied the political parties to do so, but your abstract concern about eating the rich, only if they're male, is not as convincing as asking people, do you want to get rid of all the dodgy Turkish barbers and vape shops in your high street? Do you want to get rid of all of the creepy Deliveroo drivers that leer at your school children, your daughters, while they're walking through the high street in their skirts? Do you want your future children to go to a school where they're not a hated and marginalised minority that might be set upon by various ethnic gangs? Do you want your son to not become the next Henry Novak? That's a much more convincing position than, do you want a wealth tax on these billionaires because all my friends on Reddit high-fived and jerked each other off as we said it was a good idea? We now face an existential menace. Nothing is too right-wing anymore. Well, thanks for the good news, Owen. And with that in mind, let's go over to the Servation polls of Makerfield, because for some reason, Servation is the only polling agency that's producing reliable polls in Makerfield. They've only produced 2, and this is the latest one, with respondents who are undecided or refuse to vote removed. They polled only 518 people, and they found that Andy Burnham is on 49%, Rob Kenyon of Reform has fallen down to 39%, and Restore Britain is on 8%, up 1% from 7% from their previous poll. Now, if you're looking at these polls, you're thinking, well, why are there so many attacks on Restore Britain? Why is Reform so insistent that Restore are going to split the vote and deprive them of victory when they're, in this poll, 10 points behind Andy Burnham? It seems to be of their own doing, whereas the Restore vote, according to this poll, hasn't budged. Why are they so petrified of Restore Britain? And it's because what we believe is what we do rather than what we say. Our preferences are revealed by our behaviour rather than our statements. We are what we continually do. And if Reform UK are increasingly freaking out about Restore Britain, to the point of where their website and their leaflets have copied Restore's colours and branding, see my recent chat with Carl and Dan on their political series, which I'll link down in the description for more on that. If Reform are acting in that way, and they are marshalling all of their media surrogates and leaders to make attacks on Restore Britain, then they are more worried than this poll would indicate. And the reason they're worried is laid bare in this piece by The Eye. They talk to some Labour canvassers, and Labour say, actually, we've got a really good reception on the doorsteps from wealthy people who have Porsches in the drive, and it's because only the people that are making money off the status quo are happy with Labour. The rest of the country despise what the Labour Party and Conservatives have done to our country, quite rightly so. And they say that they have a poll. It's circulating internally among Labour staffers and seen by the Eye paper, and it shows that Rupert's party, Restore Britain, are on 13%, Reform are on 24%, and Andy Burnham is on 35%. So this would mean that the vote is actually split if you believe that Reform and Restore support are the same voters, but Reform and Restore voters are not the same. And even Reform MPs admit this in this article, because a significant chunk, about 7 to 8% of the public, were shaved off of Reform support about 6 months ago, and some only became reactivated when Restore launched. So otherwise, many of those people would have stayed at home at the next election and not voted because they don't have a vote of confidence in Farage to deliver what he's promised. And so far, he's promised inconsistent things on deportations, on Islam, on the Iran war, on the economy. He's got no consistency. People don't make a positive character judgment of Nigel Farage, even if they like some of the things coming out of Reform of these days. And the Eye decided to interview anonymous politicians. A Conservative member of the Shadow Cabinet, who also visited Makerfield at the weekend, said Restore was benefiting from an almost exclusively online campaign. The thing is, the campaign translates into in-person with more canvassers than pretty much any party, so it's not just online. He says, getting Restore's supporters to actually cast their ballot would be a bigger ask. This is the angry white working class. Whether they will actually vote is another question. Well done for pouring scorn on people that you otherwise won in 2019 and then betrayed. Never trust the Tories. The Restore vote is coming from disaffected Reform voters, the MP added. It's the long marchers, the purists who are most upset with Farage. It's anger at letting all those Tories into Reform, but it's bigger than that. It's the compromises he's had to make. No, he didn't have to make those compromises. He didn't have to flatter Islam. He didn't have to denounce mass deportations and then race to readopt them when Trump pressured him into doing so, and as did Rupert Lowe. He didn't have to go all in for the Iran war. He didn't have to say that English people are anyone who identifies as English, and a Welsh person is someone who's lived in Wales for 5 years, making Axel Ruda Cabana a Welsh choir boy. He didn't need to report Rupert Lowe to the police alongside Zia Yusuf. He didn't need to pour scorn on his own voters. All of these are avoidable blunders Reform didn't need to make, and if they didn't make them, Restore wouldn't exist. In fact, you would still have Rupert in the tent. He would be the furthest right wing of Reform, and he would be retaining people's support in Reform with the belief that Rupert Lowe could push them to be more based from within. And failing to understand the value of that is a self-inflicted wound on Reform's part, and it's why they've hemorrhaged support, and they're now worried about being eclipsed by Restore. Among Reform's parliamentarians, there are mixed views on whether Restore is anything other than a flash in the pan, with its support concentrated in Norfolk. One MP dismissed the idea that Restore could actually poll more than single figures next Thursday. Their vote is really soft. It'll be nowhere near that on the day. I doubt they'll get over 2%, they said. That'll probably be Richard Tice. But ignoring the threat is not a universal approach. Quote, something important is happening, which is that voters are looking for seriousness and authenticity, and they actually see in Rupert what they don't see in Nigel Farage, is what a second Reform MP told the Eye paper. You've got anonymous Reform MPs briefing the Eye paper that Rupert is more authentic on deportations than Farage. This Reform MP continues, they like Nigel's energy and optimism in his sort of punk style. Rupert is more to the right, more of a rabble-rouser. The danger to us is he's a more plausible version of Reform because he's new. Rupert is not a very good communicator, he's not a very good speaker. He's not quick like Nigel, he's actually quite boring. Well, I don't agree. You've seen him long-form unscripted in interviews, and he does a sort of elaborate style of talking that doesn't allow him to be interrupted, a bit like Trump and Putin. So he has a bit of authority, actually. The thing that Rupert's got is he reads from a sheet a lot of the time, but he is dynamic enough to get some jabs in, so I don't think people recognise that. But they say, my anxiety is that people think Nigel is old news by virtue of being around for years, whereas they think they've discovered some new brand in Rupert, the same MP said. Yeah, Nigel has discredited himself with a large portion of erstwhile Reform voters, and also a large share of the public that just think he's a used car salesman. whereas Rupert seems authentic. And from day one, he's not only promised things that Reform are now trying to appear credible on, with Zia Yusuf being politically cunning enough to try and pilfer Restore's policies and marketing, but also Rupert has been so consistent on it that Nigel Farage has said that these policies were beyond the pale for him, and so they expelled Rupert from the party for them. So would you rather vote for the guy who has promised mass deportations and got reported to the police by his old party for promising them, or the party that is now promising mass deportations but reported Rupert to the police for promising them before? Most people who want consistency are going to vote for the people that have always promised mass deportations. There are other people that are risk-averse and will vote Reform because Reform are top of the polls. But if Reform start to dip in the polls, and they've regained after the local elections some of their polling lead, but if they start to dip in the polls because they look less sure, they look less inevitable, and if some of their members are implicated in scandals, then what's the likelihood of that Reform vote being as loyal as the intergenerational vote was for Labour and the Tories? I think much less likely. And pointing to the idea that this is a self-inflicted wound is the eyes analysis saying Burnham has some reasons to be cheerful. He's the only net positive candidate with a plus 12 approval rating. Reform's Robert Kenyon is viewed the most negatively, with a net disapproval rating of minus 14. And that's because Reform hasn't had a good answer to the old jokes that were unearthed on Rob Kenyon's Twitter account, Facebook, and various rugby forums. Instead, they've sort of hung him out to dry and told him to apologise to a baying mob that will never accept his apology as genuine and will only bare their teeth if his neck is exposed. And this is why polling currently suggests, from Find Out Now, among more than 1,000 people who voted for Reform in 2024, 19% were now breaking for Restore Britain. So, Reform got 4 million votes in 2024. That means 800,000 people could be crossing over to Restore Britain of that original cohort. And also, Restore Britain managed to turn out non-voters in Great Yarmouth, which is why they doubled their vote share compared to their nearest rival, which was often Reform. So if they turn out non-voters and 20-odd% of 2024 Reform voters and begin siphoning off some Reform supporters who object to the way that Reform treated Rupert Lowe or think that Restore have a more credible policy offering or aren't full of failed Tories, then you're going to start to see a preference cascade. And with 2.5 years out before the next election, how quick can that preference cascade from Reform into Restore? And this is just what Reform are worried about. The reason that I'm positing these things to you is not because I'm saying they're certain, but it's because these conversations have obviously been had in Millbank Tower, to the extent to where some Reform MPs are anonymously saying, yeah, we recognise this is a threat, and actually Rupert appears more authentic than Nigel, to the iPaper. And the reason there is a constituency for Restore Britain is because people are starting to realise, part in thanks, I think, to Rupert Lowe's I don't care attitude, that you can just say these things, you can just do them, and the only answer your opposition have is say, no, you can't do that. And if you just say, yeah, we can, and we will, and we want to, and we have to secure a future for our children, then they've got no answer. And they recognise that Nigel Farage is the person that will say, no, we can't do that, because I'll be called names. If you don't care about the names they call you, and you just promise to do it, then you actually inspire people. You gain their vote of confidence in your character, in your courage. And that is the preference cascade that Rupert is relying on. And that was the preference cascade on display today on Ian Dale's show on LBC, where absolute patriot Mike called into the station and just said, look, the country's going to be ungovernable if we don't do mass deportations. And Ian Dale was like, no, you can't do that. And he was like, yeah, we can. We just can. Jutting out his chin like an absolute giga-chad.
This country will remain almost ungovernable until we have mass deportations. I mean, we consistently voted Conservative. We voted for Brexit. The politicians just seem to turn around, throw it all back in our faces and say, here you go, have record levels of immigration instead. And I think the very base of this whole thing, that is this problem. Just a massive disconnect between the political class and the people of this country who have never given any consent to this. And there's certainly no mandate for the scale of immigration we're seeing into this country.
But you can't go as far as certainly Restore have gone, and indeed Reform have gone, I think, too far on this too, to deport people who are here perfectly legally.
You mean end indefinite leave to remain?
Well, you can do that for future people, but you can't do that for people who've already got it. I mean, that would be outrageous, surely.
Well, you can, yeah, of course you can. I mean, we can do it.
So people who are here perfectly legally, you think should be deported. From a basic humanity point of view, from a fairness point of view, you can't suddenly tell people who've got a perfect legal right to be here that, oh, we're changing the rules now, so you'll have to go. I mean, that you cannot do that.
You can, Ian.
Well, you can do that, but is that really the kind of country you want to live in?
Yes.
But you can't take it out on perfectly legal, law-abiding people who are here perfectly legally. That is not, I think, the kind of country that Britain is.
Yes, we can, actually, Ian. Yes, it is the country I want to live in. Yes, you can just, if these people were brought here by fiat, send them home by fiat. It doesn't matter what paperwork they possess given to them by a treacherous government that says they have a right to remain here. They don't. They are here if we want them to be, and we do not want them to be, and so we can just send them back to their own countries so we can regain possession of our home again. And Ian Dale, as a avatar of a centrist, respectable opinion, remember he was going to be a Tory candidate at the last election until there was a tape of him accidentally saying that there was anywhere else in the world he would rather live than the constituency he was going to run in Tunbridge Wells, so he withdrew his candidacy. Egg on his face. Anyway, he is an avatar of the consensus that Owen Jones supports and that he supports, which has placed a cordon sanitaire around essentially white Europeans having their own countries. And all he can do now is just say, no, you can't, it would be mean. Okay, well, you don't deserve my moral consideration. The vision that you have in mind is intolerable, and so the names you call me are tolerable to avert that intolerable future. So we can just do it. And the recognition that we can just do it means that you can just vote for the full-fat patriotic option, rather than the option that, as that shadow cabinet Tory MP has said, has made, or has felt the need to make, compromises and concessions to the containment uniparty in its pursuit of power. And this is why, when asked by The Telegraph what Rupert thought about this, he said increasing numbers of Reform 2024 voters are coming over to Restore Britain. In Makerfield, that number will be far, far higher. We're not in this to make friends in the establishment. Restore Britain is going to destroy the establishment. Real change is coming, and radical change is exactly what this country needs. Not mere reform, but restoration. Why go for a tacky knockoff cheeseburger when you can enjoy the full tenderloin? Saying, yes, millions of legal migrants are going back, is the full tenderloin. The tacky knockoff cheeseburger is, oh, we'll just close the borders, but everyone that's already here, the entire Boris wave, gets to remain. No, actually. They should all go home, and millions who came before them should also be going home too. And this is being picked up across the board. Scarlett Maguire, who does some excellent polling for Merlin Strategies, works for Jail Partners, she's the woman who did the piece in The New Statesman on how radically progressive young women hate young men and it isn't reciprocated. So Scarlett does fantastic work. She has broken down some polling posted by Jessica Elgott. And she says, Restore vote isn't as simple as wanting something to the right of reform. Instead, there's a sense among some of reform that reform will turn out to be like other politicians that have let them down. In fact, many Restore supporters think they are less extreme or racist than reform. I think that's a perception in the ground of Makerfield because they've interacted with Rebecca Shepherd and she's just a nice person, right? She's very personable. So I would sort of discount that final third paragraph because it's not a sign of ideology, it's just a sign of you're not engaging in like performative stunt politics, and so you've got like substantive policies about reversing demographic decline and sending millions of people home, but you're not doing the kinds of things that are proposed by reform, such as vindictively placing asylum accommodation in green constituencies. There's a sense among some reform voters that reform will turn out to be like other politicians that have let them down, and it's because they are the other politicians that previously let them down, and the reason people don't trust reform to reverse mass migration is because, as we've discovered, in light of this attack by a Sudanese man in Belfast attempting to behead a half-deaf guy with learning difficulties, absolutely horrible video. Turns out that this Sudanese guy got indefinite leave to remain on a fast-track scheme introduced under the Sunak government to clear the asylum backlog ahead of a general election, introduced under Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick. And of course, they are now high-profile reform defectors. Robert Jenrick is basically Farage's second-in-command as the Shadow Treasury spokesperson, and Suella Braverman is the Shadow Education and Equalities spokesperson. But they were, of course, previously the Home Secretary and Immigration Minister under Sunak. The scheme was introduced in February of 2023, and then in June 2023, it was extended to Sudanese nationals, and then Hadi al-Odid, who is the Sudanese man who committed the attack in Belfast, was granted a 5-year refugee visa in September of that year. It was initially rolled out to Eritreans, Syrians, Afghans, Libyans, and Yemenis, known as the streamlined asylum process. There should not be any Eritreans, Syrians, Afghans, Libyans, and Yemenis in Britain. They don't benefit us, they're not culturally proximate, they're disproportionately violent, they're halfway around the world, and for centuries that was a blessing. But for some reason, Rishi Sunak, under the supervision of Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, thought it was a great idea to just rubber stamp approval for these people to be in our country. And you might be saying, well, hang on a minute, Suella Braverman did try to stop this when she was in the Home Office, and fair enough, she wasn't very effective, but she did put up some institutional resistance, and Robert Jenrick resigned because Rwanda wasn't going to work. Well, if you remember, Robert Jenrick wrote an essay in 2022, I think it was, saying that welcoming Afghans is a national project, and then in 2023 he spoke in Parliament saying the UK is proud to have welcomed Sudanese nationals through our UK resettlement scheme. So this guy is in the country, is in Northern Ireland, trying to butcher a man in the street as a direct consequence of the immigration policies that Robert Jenrick pursued and supported. Now, again, I have to fess up to this. I thought that the defection of Robert Jenrick to Reform UK was actually well executed. They sort of stuck the landing. I thought that Robert Jenrick had made a convincing pitch of his Damascene conversion back in late 2024 when he tried to beat Kemi Badenoch to sip from the poisoned chalice of Conservative leadership. But you know what? Fool me twice, shame on me, because Robert Jenrick is clearly a charlatan. And he is complicit in all of the crimes committed by Afghans and now Sudanese men. And this is the problem Reform now has. It essentially has cuckoos in the nest. And people know this, or they just look superficially at the lineup of Reform's shadow cabinet in waiting and see that about half of them are Tory defectors. They also keep announcing Tory defectors with handshakes and fireworks and fanfare. That's why Zia Youssef called time on that at the local elections. But the damage is done. The self-inflicted wounds have been sustained, and so people in the Red Wall, in seats in Wigan like Makerfield, are not going to vote for a bunch of recycled Tories who already betrayed them after the one time they decided to vote Tory. So, what Reform has done to itself is essentially divide its own voter base between those who are worried about splitting the vote and letting the left in and so are sticking with Reform, and those who just want the genuine article and so are moving over to Restore, prompting the hysterical attacks from every press outlet aligned with Reform against Restore. That's why when Farage was asked yesterday about his thoughts on Restore Britain's support in Makerfield, he had a bit of a crash out himself.
When it comes to Makerfield, Restore are doing well here, and it could really help, it could really hurt you. What's Rupert Lowe got that it's appealing to some people over you? Thank you very much.
Elon Musk, thank you. I mean, most people here who say Restore, and by the way, it's not a very big percentage, most people here would not recognise a photograph of him. Right? This is stuff that pops up on their phones. That has been the problem with it. I do not believe for a moment it will last.
The head in the hands isn't all that persuasive, Nigel. Also, again, he's beating you on Facebook and Musk doesn't own that. And Elon Musk is not causing all of the people to show up in Makerfield at their own expense, giving up their weekdays or their weekends to go out and canvass for Restore because they believe in Rupert Lowe. He commands their loyalty, their authority. And so the question must be, why don't you have their loyalty? Why don't you have their trust? Why did you lose the support of Elon Musk, Nigel? All of these things are down to your character flaws. The judgments that you have made, allowing Tories into your party, disavowing mass deportations, denouncing your own voters. This is a problem of your own making, and you have nobody to blame but yourself. But don't worry, they're going to do a damn good job at trying, because if you can't join them, or you can't convince them to join you, then you have to try and beat them. And we're seeing this dialectic play out among the Conservative surrogates who have become quite chummy with Reform recently, because of course Reform has taken in so many Tories, and because they have shown they're no longer an anti-establishment party, but rather an establishment-adjacent party, courting the approval of the same establishment that inflicted the Boris wave and try to block Brexit and all of the other betrayals upon us. And so we can look at the Telegraph, commonly known as the Tory Graph, article by Camilla Tominey here, who is broadly supportive of both Farage and Badenoch, and she has written an article rather insulting towards Rupert Lowe. She says that this week, Rupert Lowe, the pugnacious leader of Restore, pulled out of an interview with me and Tim Stanley on the Daily Tea. Lowe has seemingly taken offence at me once branding him Hoopert. He dismisses Tim as a reform apparatchik. Well, that's incorrect. Tim calls Kemi Badenoch mummy, so he's actually not all that close to reform. He has a weird relationship with the Tory party. Though this article is quite disingenuous, because buried beneath the photo of Rupert Lowe, 4 paragraphs in, it says, to his credit, Lowe had a vital debate in Westminster Hall on Monday about the mandatory collection and publication of child abuse offender data. His work on the grooming gangs has been relentless and I commend him for it. Yeah, so he has a scheduling conflict where he needed to read out the testimonies in Parliament of rape gang victims from his inquiry. So I think that may be more important than the Daily Tea podcast. Now, should Rupert go on Daily Tea podcast? Sure, I think he should. Though I don't blame him for not being so inclined to put it back in his schedule when you're sitting there writing attack articles on him and insulting him on the podcast every day. You catch a lot more flies with honey than vinegar. Over at Reform, the Game of Thrones continues. Farage is at war with Lowe, the ex-Tories seem to be at war with the original reformers, Zia Yusuf is at war with absolutely everyone. It isn't strategy, it's self-indulgence. Touch of the Matt GPT writing style there, but I don't think this was written via AI, because AI would have written something better. Anyway, she points out that there is this split from the Survation polling, and urges Reform and Restore to unite alongside the Conservative. A united right that will beat Andy Burnham. Basically abiding by the premise that the right-wing vote is a fixed pie and that they aren't mutually exclusive. For example, Restore voters don't want to vote for a bunch of recycled Tories or the actual Tories, and so if Rupert were to throw his lot in with Reform or the Conservatives, he would lose Restore support, just as Reform have lost Reform support to Restore by allowing so many Tories in. So this fallacy that everyone can get on the same page, that everyone will basically support each other, not true. It's about character judgment. It's not about Machiavellian parlour games in Westminster or brokering deals in order for one another to get respective portfolios in the cabinet because it's all about your career. No, it's about fixing problems in the country and who is most credible to fix those problems. And Restore voters don't think Reform or the Tories are credible on those issues, which is why they're voting for Restore, despite Reform still being ahead in the polls. And, of course, Camilla is criticising Restore for splitting the right-wing vote, despite Restore only existing because Rupert was falsely reported to the police by Farage. She says, as we witnessed at the local elections, Restore cannot win seats in rain-lashed northern towns beyond Great Yarmouth. They didn't stand any candidates outside of Great Yarmouth, actually. Even if Ben Habib's advance stands aside, but they can easily hand them on a plate to Labour. Restore Britain, more like restore the status quo. You're literally campaigning for the Tories. You are literally campaigning for Kemi Badenoch. Restore the status quo. Are you serious? You want to elect the Tories again? Come on. Nobody's buying this. This is why we have to go through these pieces, because they're just laughable. None of the attacks are landing. They're not coming from credible places. Instead, they come across like the stages of grief. We've now reached bargaining. Don't worry, we're going to wrap straight back round to anger and calling us anti-Semites again, because we just don't care about trying to make pacts with the establishment. We want to eliminate this form of politics instead. And if Restore Britain is the best battering ram to do so, then I support swinging it at the castle doors. She then attacks Reform for criticising Kemi Badenoch for saying, I don't want to hear about White Lives Matter, despite saying that, yes, of course, Black Lives Matter in 2020. And she says, this turquoise on blue, blue on turquoise trench warfare is pathetic and must stop. Again, notice how she doesn't say navy, which is Restore's colour, because she concedes that we're not necessarily on the same side. Whereas the premise is that both the Tories and Reform are basically the same party at this point and might as well merge or have a pact. You know who else said this? Michael Gove. Michael Gove appeared on the Daily Tea with Camilla Tominey, and she put to him this thesis about uniting the right, something Zia Yusuf immediately rejected when he read Camilla Tominey's article, because he's, again, the only person in Reform that seems to have any political nous these days. Not that he should be trusted for how he treated Rupert. Nevertheless, she said to Michael Gove, oh, what do you think about uniting the right? What about Reform and Restore? And Gove was very chummy towards Reform, and so I would just suggest that if Restore has Michael Gove's disapproval, that is an endorsement.
And the problem with Reform, and particularly with Restore, is they are not serious policy outfits.
Well, quite a lot of the reform policy agenda seems to ape what Badenoch has announced.
It's the other way around.
CHR. Well, OK, so there's crossover between both sides' policies, but you're saying because reform aren't Conservative, they can't be trusted. You're both arguing for the same things on immigration.
Well, it seems to me that there are lots of people that I like, who are fond of, who vote reform or who are tempted to support reform or who are actually in reform. But reform is not a proper right-wing party. It is an inchoate populist movement that is attempting to harness understandable anger and rage. It doesn't have a serious or coherent policy platform. As for Restore, Restore is an organisation composed of jokes.
Well, is it? Rupert
Yes.
Lowe would contest that.
He's a joke.
OK.
So Restore. I mean,
OK, well, how about this then, Michael? If politics is about trade-offs,
yes.
When we look to Makerfield, why doesn't Restore and indeed the Conservatives stand back and at least allow the person on the right that has got a hope of beating Burnham in this seat to storm ahead and try and win it for the sake of the future of the country? Because we know how this is going to play out. If Burnham wins Makerfield, he has a path to Downing Street. He's most likely to succeed in that path. What will then happen is we'll have more socialism. We could have something worse than what we've already got. So for the sake of the country, the Conservatives and Restore should just sit this one out, let Farage win it, and then see what happens.
No, because Nigel Farage is not a Conservative and Reform are not a right-wing party.
Well, Nigel Farage is right-wing, isn't he? He's more right-wing than you are, frankly.
Well, I would contest that.
Really?
Yes, I mean, I think Nigel Farage was very keen at one stage on keeping or he was on the same side as Labour, actually, on welfare reform. He wanted to ensure that the two-child benefit cap was ditched.
And Robert Jenrick's talked about, you can't possibly say, Michael Gove, that you are more right-wing.
I'm more Conservative
than
Nigel Farage. I'm a proper Tory. He is not.
Yes, I am very happy to not call myself a proper Tory. Note how Michael Gove defines being right-wing as preserving the liberal economics of Blair, because he is conserving only the previous paradigm, which is why he was swanning around the Department of Education handing out copies of Blair's biography as the Cameron Conservative Party were calling themselves the heir to Blair. Nothing on demographics, nothing conspicuously on national and energy security from the man who invited Greta Thunberg to Parliament and then applauded her. Nothing from the man who said in March 2024 that Britain is a diverse country and that is our strength. Michael Gove is in no way right-wing, but he is the true face of modern conservatism, and that is why Restore aren't on the same side as the Conservatives, and if he would like to call Rupert Lowe a joke, well, again, that's a badge of endorsement for Rupert Lowe. To have Michael Gove's disapproval, as I'm sure I do, given I am banned from the premises after our debate, is, again, something encouraging. And just a reminder, Rupert Lowe, when he was expelled from Reform, was immediately invited on The Spectator by Michael Gove, and I think the pilot episode for their new podcast, Quite Right, with Madeline Grant. Madeline's actually really nice, and she gets it. It's a shame about her co-host. And it ended up being kind of struggle session that Rupert put Gove through, saying that he was to blame for COVID furlough and the trans madness and mass migration, and that he let the country down. And what I think was happening there, as was David Starkey's interview with me and with Rupert, as was Jacob Rees-Mogg's interview with Rupert on GB News, was an attempt to bring us onto the plantation. And when we rejected this containment operation, then the insults come out. Oh, you're a joke. Oh, you're an anti-Semite. Or, as Jacob Rees-Mogg has now said, Restore a wasted vote.
Right. If Restore, which was a sort of splinter off, Nigel Farage had a big fallout with a man called Rupert Lowe, who was a Reform MP, and he set up his new outfit. Do you think there's a risk that Reform might lose because of that fallout and the right splits?
Well, I keep on banging on that the right should come together. We need to work out how we can cooperate to win elections like this. There's a by-election in Aberdeen South going on at the same time. What I suggested is the Tories should help Reform in Makerfield in return for Reform helping us in Aberdeen South. That if we could win both of those, that would be very positive for the small c Conservatives in British politics. And I think Restore vote is a wasted vote. I mean, it is not helping anybody.
But some people in Reform seem to be quite rattled by it, though.
Well, Rupert Lowe has the support of Elon Musk, so everything he says on social media gets tens of millions of views.
Which matters in politics in the 21st century.
Which matters in politics. Whether those tens of millions of views are in England or whether they're in the United States, I don't know. But nonetheless, this is giving Rupert some momentum. But all it will do is make a figure who now seems to be of the left. I phrase myself cautiously because Burnham's taken practically every political position known to man, but currently seems to be moving to the harder left, become the Prime Minister.
Having Jacob Rees-Mogg's disapproval is a positive. But look at the dynamics at play here. Jacob Rees-Mogg sees the Reform Party as a natural ally to the Tories because he wants to see the Tories get back in government. He wants to reanimate that corpse. The only people that aren't an ally are Restore. They are beyond the pale. They're a wasted vote. They're racists. They're anti-Semites. They're a joke. So it shows you that they're very comfortable with Reform. They have the approval of the Conservative Party that has ruined our country. And so every schizo that's trying to say, oh, actually, Restore are a Trojan horse. They're trying to split the vote to get the Tories back into power somehow. Well, that's repudiated by the people that are attempting to broker a Tory Reform pact in front of the cameras. And of course, shamelessly in the pages of the Mail, Nadine Dorries, who was Boris Johnson's #1 cheerleader, generated the Online Safety Act, and since defected to Reform and keeps urging Reform to take Boris in, has also written up a very long schizo post in the Mail alleging a dark pact between Rupert Lowe and Dougie Smith. It's like the call is coming from inside the house. You are in Reform. Nadim Zahawi is in Reform. Robert Jenrick, Danny Kruger, Suella Braverman, even though Suella's nice. Nobody's buying this, because again, the attacks are coming from non-credible people. And they're also coming from Jacob Rees-Mogg, who just so happens to be participating in an Oxford Union debate on the side of Islam. Endorsed by Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Islamic takeover of Britain. Not endorsed, sending millions home, aim high, vote low. I know which side I'm taking. And this is why they're worried. There's a piece in Bloomberg saying Britain's being dragged to a very ugly place. Reform's ambition could be thwarted by Restore Britain, the similarly monarched rival that has seized advantage of Farage's shifting of the Overton window and set up camp even further to the far right. This isn't just bad news for Reform. Restore's social media march into culture war zones such as climate change and social cohesion is profoundly depressing. Yeah, it's depressing to you who wants the centre to hold, as she says here. She paraphrases Yeats in that sort of tired old trope. The centre, as defined by you, Rosa Prince, Michael Gove, Owen Jones, this cosy club you're all a part of, has inflicted untold atrocities onto us. The Manchester Arena bombing, the death of Lee Rigby, murder of Lee Rigby, Pakistani rape gangs, Henry Novak's murder, the recent attack in Belfast, London Bridge stabbing, Bataclan massacre, just on and on. The centre is to blame for those crimes. And so if the centre is destroyed, good. She complains that Reform has been unable or unwilling to weed out election candidates that are sexist, anti-Semitic, pro-Russian, Islamophobic, and it hasn't been strong enough on condemning mobs targeting asylum seekers. So once you're into this ugly world, what's to stop anti-immigration voters from jumping all the way into Restore Britain's arms? That's the worry from Reform. That's why Farage's head is in his hands. That's why Michael Gove is crashing out, because he is one of the facilitators behind the scenes for a Tory Reform Pact. I know that for a fact. So they are worried that their Ming vase being carefully carried into Downing Street by the same hands that pulled the levers that delivered the Boris wave are going to slip. They're worried that their carefully curated, well-funded political project with so many media organisations invested in promoting it to you as the only option, the only way to keep the left out of government, despite the people that they're promoting agreeing with the left on pretty much all their premises and worried about being called racist. They're worried that that will all fall apart because they have so many costs sunk into it. And they're worried it will fall apart because Reform's own voter base want Reform to be the party that Restore is. And once they realise the distinction between the two, there will be a flowing from one into the other. And if all of the enemies of Reform can see that, do you really think Reform haven't had that thought too? Do you really think that that is not behind Reform's seemingly disproportionate attacks on Restore for Makerfield, if Restore are really as irrelevant as Farage and other MPs are saying? If Restore isn't anywhere near Reform in the canvassing returns, and actually the gap between Labour and Reform is so large that even if Restore and the Tories were to pool their vote into Reforms, they couldn't make up the difference. If that was really the case, would they spend so much time attacking them? I don't think so. And so this produced, in Michael Gove's magazine The Spectator, one of the best covers I've ever seen. For audio listeners, this is a rendition of Rupert Lowe griefing Nigel Farage in Minecraft. I think it's based on the parody videos and edits that went around in the 2024 general election of Farage and Boris Johnson playing Minecraft and attacking each other on the server, which is a good callback. I want to frame this and put it in my bathroom. The actual article itself comes from James Heal, and it contains some interesting quotes. Restore rejects the distinction between the online space and the real world. Quote, "We are the only party in Britain that fully understands and harnesses this technology," says my friend Charlie Downs, who says Lowe feels the same way as me about the decline of our country. That's why I have staked my professional and personal reputation on making Lowe the Prime Minister. And again, I don't want to disclose private conversations with Rupert, but he gets it. On all of the issues that you are concerned about, he gets it. He does need an interview with someone challenging him from his right to ask him those questions, but he gets it. Downs argues Restore is the last shot for a peaceful return to normality after decades of madness. And what they pick up on here is the origins of Restore in Gamergate. Of course, they don't mention Carl by name, but he is a sort of figurehead of this movement of largely young men and Gen Xers who have now become dads, who spent a lot of their time growing up in the dying light of the end of history, immersed in pop cultural distractions. And then the bread became stale, the circuses became woke and gay, and so they realised upstream of the poisoning of the pop cultural artefacts they cared about, like comics or video games, that it was actually politics itself that was the problem. Legal changes, cultural revolutions, and so they got involved, did the reading, and are now dedicated to regaining possession of their country so that we can actually have the kind of safe, high-trust society where you can, play Warhammer at your local Games Workshop shop again. I was a Chaos player, by the way. Just can't afford it now. And so it is true to have a genealogy of the way of doing politics that we're now experiencing that started, I suppose, with Brexit and Trump, but have now reached their apotheosis in full-throated British identity politics in Restore. It is correct to locate that in Gamergate, but that was the moment at which the light in the room came on. But all the problems predate something like Gamergate, and they go all the way back to at least 1948. Thousands of activists have canvassed in Makerfield, according to Downs. The Premier Inn in Wigan has certainly done roaring trade, with Restore Britain members swaggering around the premises in their branded t-shirts. At one point, police were called to Reform's campaign office after a verbal altercation involving alleged Restore activists. Labour, meanwhile, is keen to talk up Restore at every opportunity in the hopes of splitting the right-wing vote. "Good for us in this election, very bad for the country," remarks one aide. Yeah, because they're afraid that Restore will eclipse Reform, and Restore actually mean what they say, whereas even though they don't like Farage, they can at least tell that they have their hooks in Reform, because the accusations of racism and bigotry that they make in Reform provoke their consciences, because some in Reform haven't learned that these people are your enemy yet. There are different shades of opinion within Reform about Restore. Most view the party as an irritant, but some see certain benefits. This is the interesting quote. "It made us up our game," admits one figure, "because we had someone to the right of us. I think it's actually made it clearer about what we want." Wouldn't be surprised if that's either Zia or Matt McKinnon, because again, those guys get it. Restore's rise is cited as a factor in Reform's deadline for Tory defections. Others in the party hope Restore will act as flypaper, ridding Reform of its worst elements. That'll be Richard Tice. One reformer estimates that up to 50 of the party's councillors elected last month will eventually defect to Restore, and it has been confirmed that Welsh Senedd members are currently eyeing up defections to Restore, but there's going to be a rigorous vetting process so that we don't take on any chances jumping from a sinking ship, and I think that's very sensible. And Nigel Farage was asked on Coffee House Shots on The Spectator to respond to this piece by its author, James Heal, and as in the clip shared by Rupert, Nigel looks rattled.
Do you think maybe, in any way, the handling of Rupert Lowe's fallout was in some way responsible for what's happened with Restore?
He's a very vengeful man. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Do you regret, though, referring him to the police?
I didn't do that. Zia did that. But he didn't physically threaten me.
Yeah.
But he physically threatened Zia more than once. When he stood up and said that we've got to consider the mass deportation of entire communities, including those born in the United Kingdom, that just moves way beyond a point of reasonableness, of decency, of morality. And that was the moment at which, I realised we just had to get rid of him, and get rid of him as quickly as we could. And I think in terms of the way we dealt with that, we were probably more brutal than the other parties. But you know what? That's the way it's going to be.
When you contrast those clips side by side, you see that the pretext that Farage and Yusuf and Anderson invented to expel Rupert from the party, it just isn't very persuasive. You already gave the game away at your shadow cabinet announcement conference, Nigel, and this is why people don't trust you, because they hear these inconsistent things, and you're acting like we aren't in the social media age where people can just dredge up these clips and quotes, contrast them side by side in real time, and that everyone isn't already online and getting lots of their news from alternative media outlets. Hello, thank you everyone for watching. But also X and Facebook, and can just see you lying in real time. Like, this strategy would have worked 20 years ago when Westminster briefings were the way that politics was done, everything was filtered through the papers, everything was a day behind the news cycle. Now it's immediate. And now people can just show what you've previously said next to what you're saying today, point out the inconsistency, and this turns politics into a character judgment contest. Especially if you're trying to make the policy offering of reform converge with that of Restore. And the more the policies look comparable on things like deportations, after you've already denounced them, it becomes a question of who do you trust to deliver the agenda that both people are promising. And if one person has consistently promised it and not reported the other person to the police for promising it, whereas the other person has disavowed it and tried to put the former member of their party in prison for promising the policy they're now promising, then people are going to vote for the guy that's been consistent and didn't call the police on their rival. And this is going across the pond. I know I have plenty of American viewers, some working in Washington, D.C. in the administration that get their UK news from me. Thank you for all you're doing, patriots. Katie Balls is currently situated in America. She's now working for The Times. She used to work for The Spectator. She's now a US correspondent for The Times. And she says that a lot of people come up to her on Capitol Hill asking about Rupert Lowe and Restore Britain. And she thinks it's a relatively small phenomena from her bubble. But what this communicates is that the dissidents within the Trump administration who would rather the agenda get back to mass deportations and stopping heritage Americans becoming a minority in their own country care more about Rupert Lowe and Restore as the genuine article than they do about the polished populism, fanfare and fireworks of reform, which they see, as people who care a lot about Britain, as just being another false promise, another exercise in politically spinning and rerouting public outrage back onto the containment establishment plantation. And she wrote up a piece on this, and she said, to some of the MAGA warriors who seek to encourage such parties on a global basis, Lowe is seen as the anointed one. General Michael Flynn, a former advisor to President Trump, who got persecuted under the obscure Logan Act, so he has a real valid reason to resent the uniparty opposition in America, has described Rupert as the leader every Brit needs right now. A State Department official recently told me Nigel Farage was now boringly mainstream and Lowe seemed the real deal. Yeah, I guarantee that's probably one of my viewers. You guys are doing great work. Lowe's social media is very flashy, explains one MAGA figure with close links to the administration, so a lot of people think he is more aggressive on immigration than Nigel Farage, even if, when you drill into it, it's more complicated. I don't think that's true. I wouldn't be surprised if that's Raheem Kassam, who is a long-time Farage ally who's been saying this exact talking point, despite the fact that, well, Reform aren't going to strip citizenships, and also Reform do not have an immigration red list that would ban immigration from India outright, though of course that would be inconvenient for Mr. Raheem Kassam. He says that many are going on vibes rather than studying the realities of the UK electoral system. Yeah, because the electioneering argument isn't convincing when people just want genuine politicians who are going to deliver on their promises, because when they voted for the least worst option in the past, they keep getting betrayed. They don't want to walk into the betrayal factory again. They don't want another Fell For It Again award pinned to their chest, which is already bleeding from the number of awards that they've had pinned there. They just want someone who's not going to stab them in the back. And many get the feeling that Nigel will. And I thought I'd round this off with the following example for anyone doubting that Rupert is the genuine article, wondering if he's just another Pied Piper. A little while ago, again I'll link it down in the description, there was a segment between myself, Carl Benjamin and Harry Robinson, one of the best lineups on the Lotus Eaters, talking about Restore Britain and the attacks on Restore, and one of these came from Melanie Phillips, who was criticising Restore as too extreme, and she decided to say that Restore Britain are basically the Groyper Party, and the Groypers are led by Tucker Carlson. And when it was pointed out to Melanie that actually Nick Fuentes is the leader of the Groypers, and Tucker Carlson doesn't like him and keeps unsportingly calling him a gay fed, she doubled down and said, well, I was right in spirit. Well, we decided to do a segment on Melanie Phillips and her previous statements saying that we want the Goyim to become Christians, and she used, the questioner used that term, she didn't challenge him on it, because Christians like Jews, and also we should be using psychological manipulation techniques to convince the West to be more pro-Israel. When we pointed that out, she decided to do another piece on Restore, saying, Restore wants to turn Britishness into an ethnic identity. It is. just as being Jewish as an ethnic identity. And if I were to deny that, well, you would call that anti-Semitic, so I don't appreciate you doing that. They say Britain needs to return to its Anglo-Saxon and Christian roots, and it must once again be white. Well, British people happen to be white. It's just an accident of the weather. Why is that a problem? So, no place in that for black or brown-skinned Brits, then, and no place for Jews. I mean, okay, not to say that there can't be people of other heritages that live here if we like them, but it doesn't mean that they're British. Like, you just calling them British doesn't make them British if they don't have any English, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish heritage. Just as, even if I were to kiss the wall clean, and I haven't, but without having any Jewish heritage, if I called myself Jewish, I would be absurd, wouldn't it, Melanie? What Restore want, therefore, is not historic Britain, but an ethno-state based on blood and soil racism. Well, Israel was founded as a Jewish state, and it was secular by David Ben-Gurion, so how is that not an ethno-state based on blood and soil? Like, it's literally based on blood, ancestry, and soil, as in, you have a claim to the land that was promised to a particular people thousands of years ago. So why is this an ethno-state for me, but not for thee? Because if you are promising this, and I think this article does, we'll get onto the rest of the quotes in a moment, then you're just an ethnic partisan. You're saying I should benefit from a double standard that I want to deprive you of, but call you a racist and try to actively deprive you of it if you don't support me having it. I'm sorry, I just don't have to listen to you then. You're just an ethnic partisan. There's no reciprocity here. There's no consideration for me, my family. There's no solidarity for us being dispossessed of our country. And it would be ridiculous for me to say, well, the Jews need to accept becoming a demographic minority in Israel, and it would still be Israel if it was a minority Jewish, or wouldn't it? But you don't think the same of Britain. So, sorry, I just don't really care what you have to say, Melanie. And again, I've had cordial correspondence with Melanie in person. I don't wish to be interpersonally insulting. But I'm just not up for this style of politics, I'm afraid. It's just going to destroy the country and mean that my children become hated and mistreated minorities. And if that fate is undesirable for Jews, then it's undesirable for me too. I just don't understand how you don't have a theory of mind for we Gentiles thinking that we might want the same thing. Perhaps it's just that you do, and you just don't think we deserve it. She says that should be repudiated by all decent people. Well, I'm sorry, unilateral nationalism is not what I consider decent, Melanie. It's not what Britain is or ever was. It isn't just poles apart from my view, shared by millions, that mass immigration and Islamization must be stopped to protect Britain's historic identity and core values. Restore's agenda would destroy that identity and core values. Or what, by reversing the things that you say have destroyed Britain's identity and core values? Because allowing them to stay continues that acidic, deleterious effect on that identity, core values, people and nation. So just halting them and trying to freeze it in amber isn't good enough, because those people still being here will still cause the conflicts and deprivation of us, of our own country, that result in the destruction of our identity, so I'm just not keen to accommodate it. Thank you very much. And in the piece, she cites links to our segment on the Lotus Eaters, and she says, they, me, Cole Harry, even objected to my ironic aside in my new book, Fighting the Hate, a handbook for Jews under siege, that diaspora Jews should keep a suitcase packed. This demonstrated, they said, dual loyalty of all things, because it showed that these Jews always had one foot out the door, that's quoting me. Zero grasped that the bitterly famous suitcase pack remark arises from the need for Jews to defend ourselves against people like them. So she's saying that I'm a Nazi, she's saying that I want to kill all Jews, she's saying that I want to expel all Jews, so immediately jumping to the anti-Semitic caricature, despite having met me, so that's not really appreciated. I said, if you wanted to dispel accusations of dual loyalty, maybe don't say you should keep a suitcase packed at all times to go to a backup nation. Because the point is, Melanie, I don't have a backup nation. You live in Israel because of the Islamization and mass migration that you condemned, but don't want to reverse. But I have no Israel to go to, and your complete lack of sympathy for that standpoint means that if you aren't willing to listen to that complaint, then I don't have to listen to you when you call me names. Because if you don't address the substance of my concern and instead try to deride me and deprive me of the method by which I would regain possession of my own country, then I don't have to care when you're offended. Especially when it's done in such a disingenuous way. And you also, again, you follow me on Twitter, you could have just DM'd me about this if you had a problem. Because these Restore types come from a very dark place, they're eaten up with resentment that in the state of Israel, the Jews have their own country while the British have nowhere else to go to escape the destruction of their culture. The Jews have their own ethno-state, they rage, so why don't they support us in having one of our own? That's a completely fair comment. Completely fair. She says the comparison falls flat because, she says, most Israeli Jews are brown or black-skinned, yet we're talking about ethnicity, heritage here. Skin colour is incidental So that's a complete misdirection. And then she says, plus 20% of Israeli citizens are Arabs, and there are Druze and some others. Okay, but you're not exactly delighted about that, are you? Come on. Like, clearly, you're not happy about the ever-present threat of Islamization in Israel. That's why the Israelis are trying to expand their territory, gain more settlements, bolster the Jewish population, to ensure that they don't meet the same fate. So, again, this is a misdirection. And then she says, in addition, Judaism itself is not just an ethnicity, but also comprises a religion and a people. There is no other people, religion, or ethnicity like it is unique. Right, so you're the special exception. Even though being white British, English, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish shows up on DNA tests, so we can validate, as Paul Morland and Anthony Smith say, the myth of common ancestry using modern science. We have been a Christian nation for over 1,000 years, and it has shaped our family formation by prescribing cousin marriage, creating our nuclearized family units, creating our culture, our high-trust society, our legal system, our manners, our morals that are pretty unique. So actually, yeah, the British people are unique. They are a people with a distinct religion, an established church even, not that the Anglicans seem to know that, and ethnicities. Native, ethnic groups with thousands of years of continuity. And if the Jews can have that claim, despite being dispersed all across the European continent and the Middle East, from thousands of years of exile to then return to their homeland which they claim as their birthright, then the same standard applies to the British. And if you deprive us of that, you're not just an ethnic partisan, you're actually quite vindictive. I don't know why you want to do this. It would be perfectly consistent, as some other Jews have said, who watch my stuff, that if we get this in Israel, yeah, of course they would want it in Britain too. And if you think that double standard can sustain just by calling us names, well, I'm sorry, I just have to recite the 3 magic words. I don't care.